From a homily of Pope Benedict XVI, August 15th, 2007. In his great work De Civitate Dei, St. Augustine says once that the whole of human history, the history of the world, is a struggle between two loves. Love of God to the point of losing oneself, of total self-giving, and love of oneself to the point of despising God, of hating others. This same interpretation of history as a struggle between two loves, between love and selfishness, also appears in the 12th chapter of the book of Revelation. Here, these two loves appear in two great figures. First of all, there is the immensely strong red dragon with a striking and disturbing manifestation of power, without grace, without love, of absolute selfishness, terror, and violence. At the time when St. John wrote the book of Revelation, this dragon represented for him the power of the anti-Christian Roman emperors, from Nero to Domitian. This power seemed boundless. The military, political, and propagandist power of the Roman Empire was such that before it, faith, the Church, appeared as a defenseless woman with no chance of survival and even less of victory. Who could stand up to this omnipresent force that seemed capable of achieving everything? Yet, we know that in the end, it was the defenseless woman who won, and not egoism or hatred. The love of God triumphed, and the Roman Empire was opened to the Christian faith. The words of sacred scripture always transcend the period in history. Thus, not only does this dragon suggest the anti-Christian power of the persecutors of the Church at that time, but also anti-Christian dictatorships of all periods. We see this power, the force of the red dragon, brought into existence once again in the great dictatorships of the last century. The Nazi dictatorship and the dictatorship of Stalin monopolized all the power, penetrated every corner, the very last corner. It seemed impossible in the long term that faith could survive in the face of this dragon that was so powerful, that could not wait to devour God become a child, as well as the woman, the Church. But also in this case, in the end, love was stronger than hate. Today, too, the dragon exists in new and different ways. It exists in the form of materialistic ideologies that tell us it is absurd to think of God. It is absurd to observe God's commandments. They are a leftover from a time past. Life is only worth living for its own sake. Take everything we can get in this brief moment of life. Consumerism, selfishness, and entertainment alone are worthwhile. This is life. This is how we must live. And once again, it seems absurd, impossible, to oppose this dominant mindset with all its media and propagandist power. Today, too, it seems impossible to imagine a God who created man and made himself a child, and who was to be the true ruler of the world. Even now, this dragon appears invincible. But it is still true today that God is stronger than the dragon, that it is love which conquers rather than selfishness. Having thus considered the various historical forms of the dragon, let us now look at the other image, the woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, surrounded by 12 stars. This is also a multidimensional image. Without any doubt, a first meaning is that it is Our Lady, Mary, clothed with the sun, that is, with God, totally. Mary, who lives totally in God, surrounded and penetrated by God's light, surrounded by the 12 stars, that is, by the 12 tribes of Israel, by the whole people of God, by the whole communion of saints, and at her feet the moon, the image of death and mortality. Mary has left death behind her. She is totally clothed in life. She is taken up body and soul into God's glory, and thus, placed in glory after overcoming death, she says to us, "Take heart, it is love that wins in the end." The message of my life was, I am the handmaid of God. My life has been a gift of myself to God and my neighbor, and this life of service now arrives in real life. May you too have trust and have the courage to live like this, countering all the threats of the dragon. This is the first meaning of the woman whom Mary succeeded in being. The woman clothed with the sun is the great sign of the victory of love, of the victory of goodness, of the victory of God, a great sign of consolation. Yet, this woman who suffered, who had to flee, who gave birth with cries of anguish, is also the church, the pilgrim church of all times. In all generations, she has to give birth to Christ anew, to bring him very painfully into the world with great suffering. Persecuted in all ages, it is almost as if, pursued by the dragon, she had gone to live in the wilderness. However, in all ages, the church, the people of God, also lives by the light of God, and as the gospel says, is nourished by God, nourishing herself with the bread of the Holy Eucharist. Thus, in all the trials, in the various situations of the church through the ages, in different parts of the world, she wins through suffering, and she is the presence, the guarantee of God's love against all the ideologies of hatred and selfishness. We see, of course, that today too, the dragon wants to devour God who made himself a child. Do not fear for this seemingly frail God. The fight has already been won. Today too, this weak God is strong. He is true strength.